Welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. In this video, we are going to see how to create a Cognito user pool with default settings and then add Okta as an identity provider in AWS Cognito, and so that users from the Okta can single sign on to the applications that are configured in AWS Cognito. I'm going to use SAML for now in this video to set up the integration between AWS Cognito and Octa. In a later video, I will also show how to set up the integration between AWS Cognito and Octa using OpenID Connect. So I'm going to use the AWS Management Console for this AWS Cognito service, and I already have a Octa developer account which I signed up using my Gmail ID. In case you don't already have a Octa developer account, you can always go and search for Octa developer account. And then you can go to the sign up page and sign up for a developer tenant using using your Google ID. I have already done that, and you already see my admin console here. And I'm going to use Firefox for testing this integration so that it will be easier to switch between two different browsers for configuration and testing. So this involves multiple steps. So please follow the video, and if you miss any steps, you can come back and refer, or if you face any issues or if you have any questions, you can post it in the comments and I will reply back to your comment. So the very first step in this integration is to create a Cognito user pool. I'm not going to explore any of the advanced features that are available. I'm just going to create a very basic user pool because our goal is to set up the integration with Octa and see what we need to do in order to set up that integration. So I'm just going to quickly go through these steps to create a very basic pool. So in the first page, you can select username as the sign-in option. Click next. Password policy, you can leave it as it is. Multi-factor, let's disable it for now. And let's disable these options as well. We don't need self-registration because we are going to test with Octa. And you can even uncheck this value. Required attributes, we will leave it for now. Anyway, we are going to set most of the basic attributes. We don't have to make it mandatory. Let's just leave it for now. Click next. Select this option so that it will automatically apply some of the default settings and we don't have to worry about it. Click next. And here we need to give a user pool name. So I'm going to name it as Octa user pool just for testing purpose. So, and please select this option, use the Cognito hosted UI. And here we need to give a domain name. So I'm going to maybe mention it as Octa SAML, and it is available. And you can give any name here. If it is not available, change the name and it will automatically show if it is available or not. So we need to create at least one client to start with. So I'm going to just name it as Octa client, generate a secret, and for this URL, add it as jwt.io, and you can check these values. And here it says Cognito user pool, grant types as authorization code grant. Let's actually add implicit grant and remove this authorization code grant. But please keep in mind that implicit grant is deprecated. It's not at all secure. We should never use it for any client integrations. This is only for testing purpose that I'm using the implicit grant, but please don't use it for any real applications that are in production. If you are just doing some basic testing like this, it's fine, but don't use it. So we have implicit grant. I will remove this phone scope and add profile scope. So we have OpenID profile and email. Leave these settings as default. Click next. So you can review all the settings here and click create user pool. So now the user pool got created and there are no users in this user pool. No other configuration is done. Just the basic configurations are done. And the next step is to set up the integration between AWS Cognito and Okta using SAML Federation. So for that, let's go to Okta dashboard and go to this applications menu and click create app configuration. Here select SAML 2.0 and let's name it as Cognito app 1, then click next. So it will ask for few details like what is the assertion consumer service URL for this Cognito user pool, what is the audience entity ID, that is the SP entity ID. So you need to add all these values. So let's go to the Cognito documentation and see what values needs to be configured in the identity provider. So if you go to the developer guide, so somewhere here you will see this option adding sign in through a third party and adding SAML IDP providers. So here you can scroll down and go through these uh, documents, but what we need now is this assertion consumer URL and the audience. So this is the audience ID that we need to configure. So go back, copy this, go back to Okta console, add it here, and replace this user pool ID with whatever you see here. So this is the unique identifier for the Cognito user pool that I created. When you create a user pool, you will get a similar kind of unique identifier. And then the single sign-on URL is this one. So copy this, paste it here, and replace the domain and region. So the domain is Okta SAML and region is US-West-1. So these values are now configured. The next step is to add the attributes. So let me add some of the attributes that we need to post in this SAML assertion. So we need the given name. So that is mapped to the Okta's user's first name, then last name. That is mapped to last name. Then email. That is mapped to the email. And let's add name as well and map it to user.display name. Actually, it won't get this particular display name attribute won't get displayed in this drop down, but it actually exists in the Okta user profile. You can verify it later. So you can add that user.display name as well. And here, if I click the preview SAML assertion, Okta will show how the SAML assertion will look like and what all attributes will be sent in the authentication and the attribute statements. So click next and select this second option, which is software vendor, and click finish. So now the Cognito app is configured in Okta for the SAML integration. The next step is to configure this Okta identity provider in Cognito. So in order to do that, we need the metadata. So once you create this Cognito app in Okta, you will see this screen where you can see the SAML signing certificates. So here, if you click actions, you can actually download the metadata. Let's actually save this metadata. Save as Cognito IDP 1.xml. Actually, I will name it as Okta IDP 1.xml. So go back to Cognito screen and go to sign in experience, click add identity provider, select SAML and name it as Octa IDP1 and name the identifier as octaidp1.com. So this is just for testing purpose. There is no domain called octaidp1.com. I'm just adding it for testing purpose. So you can just use any name and I will let you know where this identifier is used at a later point of time. So choose the metadata file and map the attributes. So let's map one by one attribute. So if you look at this left hand side, these are the attribute names in Cognito user pool. The right hand side value is the attribute name that is posted in the SAML assertion. So if you go back to this Octa screen and click general, these are all the attribute names that will be posted in the SAML assertion. So copy one by one and add it here. So given name is mapped to given name and family name is mapped to last name. So if you go here, I have added it as last name and name is mapped to name. So the identity provider is now added and the next step we need to do is create a test user in Octa. So let's go to the directory people and add a new user. Let's name it as Octa IDP1 test user and name it as Octa IDP1 user at, let's use that same domain that we gave here, which is octaidp1.com, and let's set the password, some default password, and click save. So the user got created. It won't show up immediately. You can again refresh the screen and it will show. So you can go to the user and go to the profile and edit and add the display name. So this is the attribute which I mapped to the, which was mapped to that name attribute in the SAML assertion. So when I was creating the user, it didn't allow me to set this attribute. So you can come back to the profile and then edit it and save. And the next step is to assign that application to this user. So let's assign that Cognito app1 to this user so that this user can access that application. So now go back to the Octa user pool. And if you remember, we created an application while provisioning this user pool and it was called as Octa client. And initially I added the identity provider as only Cognito user pool. Now I'm going to include this Octa IDP as well. So now both this application can be accessed by users in Cognito user pool as well as users from the Octa IDP. So now let's copy this hosted UI URL and I'm going to use Mozilla for testing. Let me clear all the cookies so that I can get the login page properly and then redirect to Octa and see what happens. So now you can see both the options. So this application can be accessed by users from Cognito user pool or from users from Octa IDP. So click the Octa IDP. We got redirected to the Octa login page. Now we have to log in using that Octa user that we created, which is Octa IDP user at octaidp1.com. Great. So if you look at this login flow, the user was able to successfully log in and access this jwt.io app without any issues. So you can check the name. This is the name we configured for the Okta user. This is the last name. This is the email. And then you have the given name, which is Okta. So the user was able to successfully log in. If you go back to the Cognito user pool and users, you will see that username, that user profile got created here. And the prefix is the Okta IDP1 identifier that we specified when we added that SAML Identity Provider. And the username is the email address of that user. So this is how you set up the SAML federation between AWS Cognito and Okta as the identity provider. I'm just going to do a slight enhancement to this just to show some additional features in Cognito. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another SAML identity provider just to show a feature, the automatic domain discovery feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same Okta instance for configuring this SAML, but in reality, this is basically like you can consider like two different customers. Let's say you want to configure two different customers in your Cognito user pool, and both the customers have different domains. When I say domain, like email domains, like here I specified oktaidp1.com. So you can have some customer like organization a.com, organization b.com, and organization A might be using Okta, organization B might be using Azure AD. So you can configure multiple SAML identity providers in your user pool and map the organization a.com to Okta and organization b.com to Azure AD. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate that by using the same Okta instance. So in order to do that, I am actually going to configure a new application in Okta for the same Cognito user pool, similar to this one. So let's actually open this in a new tab and keep it for reference. And let's create a new SAML application. And let's name it as Cognito App 2. So these values will be same, this particular value, these URLs will be same because we are using the same Cognito user pool. But as I said, in reality, it will be like consider that this new SAML integration that we are creating is for a new organization, which is using a totally different Okta instance, or maybe it is using Azure AD. You can imagine however you want, but I'm just trying to simulate that same use case here. And these attributes, let's use that same mapping. So given name is mapped to first name, last name is mapped to last name, and then email to email, and name to user dot display name. So you can click next. I'm a software vendor, and finish. So now you can download this metadata again. So this metadata will have a different sign-in URL. That's how actually Okta identifies to which application the user is trying to log in. So if you look at the previous metadata, the sign-in URL, sign-on service URL will be different. For example, if I go here, Okta IDP1, and see the XML file here. So this sign-on URL, the base domain is same, but then this maps to Cognito App 1. And if you look at this metadata, it's Cognito App 2. So that's how Okta actually identifies the application to which the user is trying to sign in. So I'm going to save this, and I will name it as Okta IDP2 metadata.xml. and go back to the user pool. So here I gave OktaIDP1.com. So I'm going to add a new identity provider, and I'm going to name it as Okta IDP2 and the domain as OktaIDP2.com. So I need to configure this second metadata and add the attributes. So email is mapped to email, family name is mapped to last name, given name is mapped to first name, and name is mapped to name. So this identity provider is now added. So now we have two different identity providers, even though it's pointing to the same Okta instance, but in reality, you can assume it will be like two different organizations having two different Okta instances, or an Okta instance and Azure AD instance, whatever it is. So now I need to actually create another user. So in order to differentiate, to show how it works, I will create another user, and I will name that user as Okta IDP2 user at OktaIDP2.com. To user, and I will set the password. So refresh it and go inside this user profile, click edit and set the display name for this user, Okta IDP2 user, click save. And we are going to assign this second application to this user. So if you remember, for the first user, we assigned Cognito App 1. For this user, I'm going to assign Cognito App 2. So what it means is the first user cannot access Cognito App 2 and the second user cannot access Cognito App 1. So now it's done. So now actually let's go back to this app integration and I will show you how the entire UI changes. So if you actually copy this link address, go to Mozilla, I will clear all the cookies. So if you look at this screen, you have a username password. So if any users that are directly created in the Cognito user pool can access this application. So basically the users who are in Cognito user pool, like I didn't create any user. The user that you are seeing here is created through the Okta Federation. But if you want to create a user, you can click this create user button, set a username, password, and then using that username password, you can log in here directly. And the other button indicates that any user who is assigned to this Okta IDP1 can log in using this Okta IDP1 Federation. Now, excuse me. Now I'm going to actually add Okta IDP2 as well in this app client and click Save Changes. So let's go back to Mozilla and just refresh this screen. So now you see the login page, it's completely different. That is because now we have two different SAML identity providers configured in the client, and both these identity providers have identifiers configured. When I say identifiers, it is this one. So this Okta IDP1.com and then this identity provider as oktaidp2.com. So what Cognito will do is basically if I try to enter an email address with oktaidp1.com, it will allow me to log in through this Cognito app 1. And if I try to enter a email address with oktaidp2.com, it will allow me to log in using Cognito app 2. So let's test that actually. So I will first enter Cognito, like this as my email address. So here it says sign in with your corporate ID email. I'm entering oktaidp1.com and click sign in. And now when I try to log in, as usual, it works fine. There are no issues. I can see the ID token here. Let me clear the cookies again so that I can again test the login. So I need that URL. So copy that URL again. And now when I try to log in using say idp2.com, this user doesn't exist in the Cognito pool. This is the very first time I'm trying to log in. So let's see if it works fine. Yes, it works fine. So the user should have got created in the Cognito user pool. You can check it here. So if you look at these two users, right, the first user has a prefix oktaidp1 underscore, and the second user has the prefix oktaidp2 underscore, which basically means I logged in using the first identity provider and then the second identity provider. Now I will show a different flow. Let me clear these cookies, again copy the So let's say I enter oktaidp2.com here. So Cognito will redirect me to that specific URL, the application's URL. That is, Cognito actually redirected to the Cognito app 2 application's URL, which is currently assigned to only that Okta IDP user 2. That is, if you look at this, so the IDP2 user, only Okta IDP2 user can access that second application that we configured. This user cannot access that application. So if you look at this, currently this Okta sign-in URL points to that second application that we configured. So now if I try to enter the first user's credentials, Okta will give an error saying this user cannot log in. See, so this is the error. Okta says this app is not assigned for the first user. So I can go back to the home page and it will just show the Okta dashboard with the first tab. You can check the first tab here. But anyway, I'm going to clear the cookies. And similarly, if I try to access the first tab that I configured, that is the Okta IDP1. So I'm entering Okta IDP1 and Cognito, based on that IDP1.com, Okta IDP1.com, Cognito will redirect me to the first SAML provider that I configured here. That is, if you go back here, the Okta IDP1 SAML Identity Provider. So if I try to log in using the second user, it should throw that same 403 error. Yeah, so this is expected because like second user cannot access the first application and the first user that I created cannot access the second application. Now if I actually go back to this screen and let's say I assign the first step also to this second user. So let's again copy this hosted UI. now I try to log in using this user. It should ideally work because now this user can access both the applications. Yes, it worked. The reason why it didn't show the Okta login page is because I already had a valid session. So now I'm able to access the second application as well. So if I go back to the Cognito user pool, you should see 3 user profiles. So if I go to users, oh, actually it didn't create another user. Yeah, because what it did is basically it used the email address to map the same user. So I don't think it created another user. It just reused that same email address. So this is how you actually set up the federation, SAML federation between AWS Cognito and Okta. And if you want to make your client application multi-tenant, so basically if you go here, you can see some details on how to make your app multi-tenant. So basically if you go to choosing SAML names, so here they have explained whatever I showed, like setting identifiers, and then Cognito will automatically identify the organization based on the domain that you enter in this text field. And this is how you design a multi-tenant application where users from multiple different organizations can access the application by just entering their email address, and Cognito will take care of redirecting to the corresponding identity provider for that particular organization so that users from that organization can access that application. So I'm pretty sure you might face some issues here and there. Please post your questions or issues in the comments and I will respond back to your comment. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much, and again please subscribe to my channel. Thank you.